My parents ditched me at 14, calling me a freak because of my medical issues. Now, they're crawling back, begging for my inheritance to bail out my brother from his mess. I was diagnosed with epilepsy at a pretty young age, and honestly, that marked the start of a tough chapter in my life. Unfortunately, my parents weren't the type of people who knew how to handle something like that, mentally or emotionally. From that point on, it felt like they didn't see me as their child anymore, but more like a problem they couldn't fix. I think I was around 6 when I first realized just how differently they treated me compared to my older brother. He was 3 years older than me, and for some reason, my parents always seemed to favor him. Maybe because he was easier to manage, or maybe because he didn't come with a medical diagnosis. As if epilepsy alone wasn't hard enough, I got hit with another blow at the age of 8. I was also diagnosed with dyslexia and severe ADHD. Needless to say, I was a handful, and my parents didn't cope well with that at all. Now, if they had been warm, compassionate people, parents who were grateful to have a child, no matter the circumstances, maybe things would have turned out differently. I know raising a child with special needs isn't easy, but hey, they were the ones who chose to bring me into this world. They seem to think that just because my brother turned out fine, I would too, like having one healthy child guaranteed, the next one would be the same. But when that didn't happen and I turned out to be the difficult one, it was like they were stuck with me. And they made sure I knew it. They treated me like a burden they were forced to carry, not like someone they loved. I didn't get to have the kind of happy, carefree childhood that other kids talk about. And it wasn't just the health issues that made things miserable. It was mostly the way my parents responded to them. Looking back, I'd say the illnesses were a minor part of the pain. The real damage came from how they treated me because of those illnesses. In my own family, I was made to feel like some kind of outcast, like I didn't belong. They never let me forget that I was unwanted and that I didn't quite fit into their perfect picture. Every time I walked into a room, I could feel the tension. They'd go silent, like someone had just pulled the plug on the energy in the room. And this wasn't when I was some angsty teen acting out. This was before I even turned 10. As I got older, things just got worse, not better. My mental health was already shaky, and their treatment didn't help. By the time I hit my teenage years, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I started lashing out. I think it was a mix of all the bottled up pain and the usual hormonal mess of adolescence. But I just broke. I stopped caring about school, stopped trying. I began failing on purpose just to piss them off. I was angry, really angry, and the only way I knew how to deal with it was to rebel. I turned rude and confrontational with everyone, even people who were trying to be there for me. I was pushing away friends, shutting people out, even though I knew deep down it wasn't the right thing to do. But I was drowning in misery and didn't know any other way to get my parents to notice me. Even when the school called them in to report my behavior, they barely reacted, just let out these tired sighs of disappointment and didn't say much else. They wouldn't even scold me. It was like they'd already given up. I hated being around them. I'd throw tantrums at home, trying to stir up any kind of reaction. But they just ignored me, kept talking among themselves, not even bothering to whisper. I could hear them saying things like, "She's having one of her fits again," while rolling their eyes like I was a nuisance instead of their daughter. They kept telling me to be normal, but that was the most engagement I ever got. It broke my heart in a way I still don't fully know how to explain. Then came the moment that really changed everything. I was 14 and decided to take things up a notch. One day, I brought a pack of cigarettes to school and lit one up right in the middle of class. When the teacher told me to stop and get out, I didn't just walk out, I flipped him off. That was the breaking point. I'd already been on thin ice at school, but until then, my parents always gave teachers the excuse that I wasn't quite right in the head. They played the special child card to explain away my behavior. But this time, it was too much, even for them. I got expelled, and for the first time ever, my parents were actually furious. They didn't hold back that day. They said things I don't think I'll ever be able to unhear or forgive. It wasn't that they told me anything I didn't already fear deep down, but hearing them say it out loud hurt in a way that words can't really describe. They told me they regretted having me. Said if they had known I'd turn out like this, they would have ended the pregnancy. They called me a burden and said their lives were better when they just had one son. Then they dropped the bomb. They were done with me. I got grounded, but not in the typical go to your room kind of way. They locked me in my room for an entire week. I was only allowed out for bathroom breaks, and they sent my meals up to me like I was in a prison. I wasn't allowed to talk to anyone or even leave the house. It honestly felt like solitary confinement, except worse because it wasn't strangers doing it to me, it was my own parents. And no, I hadn't committed some unforgivable crime. I was a kid acting out because I was hurting. Sure, I wasn't easy to handle, I can admit that. But they were supposed to be the adults. They were the ones who chose to have a child. They should have been better prepared. After that week, I finally understood what they meant when they said I wouldn't be part of the family anymore. One day, completely out of the blue, they told me to get in the car with all my stuff. My brother and my mom had already packed up my things for me. I just sat in the car, waiting, not really knowing what came next. About an hour later, everything was packed, and we were on the road. It felt like a familiar drive, and after a few minutes, I realized we were heading toward my grandmother's house, my dad's mom. For a second, I thought maybe my parents had decided to send me there for a bit to cool off and get my head straight. I knew my grandma was strict, but she also had a soft spot for me, and I always felt like she treated me better than my parents did. So, in my mind, this wasn't going to be a punishment. I figured I might stay with her for a couple of weeks until things calmed down. But when we pulled up to her house, it became clear this wasn't a temporary arrangement at all. They weren't just dropping me off for a while, they were leaving me with her for good, giving up on me, and essentially telling me they didn't want me around anymore. I could feel it in my bones that this was the end of whatever relationship I had left with them. That week had been spent convincing my grandmother to take me in because, as far as they were concerned, I was now her problem, not theirs. When we got to her house, my parents unloaded all my things, dropped them at the door, and told me to bring them inside. They said this was now my new home and made it clear they never wanted to hear from me again, especially after everything that had happened. To them, I had been trying to ruin their lives, and they felt like I crossed a line that couldn't be undone. At that moment, I tried to beg them not to do this because, despite everything, I still wanted to be part of their lives. I don't know why, but I was only 14 and I was desperate to find some sense of belonging in my family. So, standing there at the door, I couldn't process that they were truly abandoning me in my grandmother's house. I was also worried, though. I knew my grandma loved me, but I wasn't sure she was prepared to take on a troubled kid like me, especially with her getting older. She was already in her 60s, and I feared she'd only be able to handle me for so long. I didn't want to be a burden to her, just like I had been to my parents. I could never disappoint her the way I had disappointed them. I thought about all the times I had visited her, when she found out what I had been doing at home and school. She was always disappointed, yes, but she never gave up on me. She'd encourage me, tell me I was stronger than I seemed, and that if I behaved better, maybe my parents would come around. But I wasn't sure she'd still be there for me once I moved in. I worried she might start resenting me, just like my parents had. It was a complicated mess. I begged them to reconsider, but they told me their decision was final. Right there, in front of me, they told my grandmother that they were done with me and didn't want to hear another word about me. They even went as far as to say they didn't want a freak like me living with them anymore, that they wanted to focus on my normal brother. Hearing them say that stung in a way I didn't expect. That's the kind of language bullies at school used when they made fun of me, and it hurt to hear my parents use those same words. It's one thing when kids at school call you a freak. It doesn't hurt as much because you're used to it. But when my own parents said it, it felt like a slap in the face. In that moment, I realized my parents weren't just neglecting me. They were the biggest bullies in my life. And maybe they were doing me a favor by letting me live with my grandma, because deep down, I knew they never loved me for who I was. No matter what I did, I would never measure up to their expectations. I bet that even if I had been perfect, they wouldn't have cared as long as my brother was the one they truly saw. So at that point, I stopped begging, I stopped fighting. I accepted that I was going to live with my grandma from now on. And I decided right then and there that I was going to do better because I deserved it, and so did she. I wasn't going to throw away my life just because my parents didn't love me. Once they left, my grandmother and I had a much-needed conversation. She told me, honestly, that while she loved me, she hadn't been prepared to take me in. She was concerned because from what she'd heard from my dad, I'd been quite a handful. At her age, she wasn't sure she could handle raising a troubled kid like me. She told me she understood I needed help, but wasn't sure she could provide the right kind of space for me to grow. It had taken her a week to decide, and part of that was because she had heard about how my dad had treated me, locking me in my room for a week straight. She said, after hearing that, she realized my dad wasn't the right parent to take care of me. She apologized for not stepping in sooner, but she also reminded me that she had her own life to worry about. She was a widow, didn't have much to her name, and wasn't sure if adopting me would be the right move. But after learning just how badly my parents had treated me, she understood why I had acted out. She told me she wanted to start fresh with me and give me a chance to grow, unlike my parents had. And that's when she said I should see this as an opportunity, and that's exactly what I did. I apologized to my grandmother for everything I had done in the past and told her I forgave her for not intervening sooner. I understood why she hadn't adopted me earlier, even though she knew how badly my parents were treating me. We agreed to put everything behind us and work together from that point on. It was a fresh start, and I'm forever thankful for the role she played in my life. I truly don't believe I would be the person I am today if it hadn't been for her. After I moved in with her, I made a conscious decision to be better in everything I did. Even though my grandmother wasn't perfect, she tried her best to help me and provide the space I needed to thrive. She found the right tutors for me, enrolled me in a private school, and made sure everyone understood that I wasn't like other students. But unlike my parents, she didn't use that as an excuse to treat me differently. Instead, she used it as a reason to give me the help I obviously needed. And that made all the difference. Thanks to her, I graduated with a good score and went to college, just like any other kid. I was able to live the life I wanted, and I owe all of that to my grandmother. For the next few years, my parents continued to visit her, but they never tried to reach out to me. Whenever they came by, I would leave the house and come back after they had left. It was easier that way, and it didn't seem to bother them, nor did it bother me. That went on for a while, until one day my grandmother had enough. She confronted them, telling them they were horrible parents for never even attempting to talk to me, especially now that I was doing better. They refused to acknowledge that they had done anything wrong, instead pretending like they were perfect parents and I was just a bad kid. They called me a rotten apple and a freak yet again, and that's when my grandmother lost it. She told them never to come back, and from then on, they never did. Their egos were so inflated that they couldn't accept the truth. They had failed me. But thanks to my grandmother's guidance, I had turned things around. They couldn't comprehend that, and after that fight, I never spoke to them again. For nearly 10 years, my grandmother and I didn't communicate with them, and we pretended they didn't exist. I reached milestones, achieved goals, and moved forward with my life, but never once did I hear from them. I didn't block them on social media, yet they never made an effort to reach out. I had my own life now, and they just disappeared from it. But everything changed when my grandmother passed away a few months ago. Her death hit me hard. She was the only person who had always been there for me, supporting me unconditionally. Even though we hadn't lived together for a few years after I moved out for college, she was still my rock, and it's been a struggle trying to cope without her. And then, out of nowhere, my parents reached out to me, not even 6 months after her passing. They came to my door, demanding that I share my inheritance with them. Apparently, my very normal and healthy brother wasn't doing as well as they had expected, and they needed my help to fix the mess he had gotten himself into. I was shocked when they came over, especially since my brother wasn't with them this time. Normally, he always came along, but this time, it was just them. At first, I thought maybe they had finally come to apologize. But no, after some small talk and fake condolences, they got straight to the point. They told me that, while in college, my brother had developed a drug habit, and now it was affecting his ability to work. They downplayed the situation, but from what I could tell, he was in serious trouble and needed help. And of course, they wanted me to share my inheritance to pay for his rehab. I asked them why he couldn't just go to one of the more affordable rehab programs, but they insisted that it wouldn't work for him. Apparently, he needed a residential program, which, surprise, surprise, cost a lot of money. Honestly, I don't know much about rehab, and I'm not going to go out of my way to find out, but I know that I'm comfortable now. I've worked hard to get to where I am, and I've earned what I've got. And the truth is, my grandmother was well off too. She'd inherited money from my grandfather and had invested it wisely. But here's the kicker. Even though my parents knew how much money my grandmother had, they were too proud to contact her or apologize to her in the final years of her life. They thought they could ignore her and still get what they wanted later, and now, here they were, coming to me for help. I didn't care about any of that. I told them I was willing to help them out, but there was one condition. They had to publicly acknowledge everything they had done, how they had treated me, the awful things they said, and how they treated my grandmother. I wanted them to admit they needed my help and explain why they were asking for my money. For years, we had kept everything private because my grandmother didn't want drama, but now that they were at my door asking for my help, I thought it was only fair for the truth to come out. I wasn't going to feel guilty about it either. If they wanted my help, they had to face the consequences of their actions. When I said this to them, their faces fell. They tried to negotiate, telling me I was being unreasonable and selfish, but I stuck to my guns. This was my condition, take it or leave it. I had no problem giving them the money they needed, but I wasn't going to let them off the hook for what they'd done. I wasn't even angry with my brother anymore, and I didn't hold anything against him, but my parents? They had to own up to their mistakes, and if they couldn't do that, I wouldn't help them. It was as simple as that. They started calling me heartless and emotionless, saying they never expected this from me. But I reminded them, they shouldn't have expected anything from me at all, especially considering we hadn't spoken in nearly a decade. If they wanted anything from me now, they had to acknowledge the wrongs they'd done and apologize for real. That's it, I don't want to hear any more about it. They left after a lot of crying and accusations, but I didn't budge now. They're trying to change my mind, telling me that my brother is in terrible condition and that he needs my help. I don't understand why they think I should just do things for them when I never expected anything from them. It was just my grandmother and me, and we managed. They never cared enough to check on us or help us out. Even after all these years, when my grandmother passed away, I doubt they would have even found out unless I had told my relatives. That's how they even knew about the funeral. So why should I help people who've been absent from my life for the last 10 years? I just want to make sure I did the right thing by telling my parents that I won't help them financially unless they publicly acknowledge their mistakes. Thank you all for your comments on my original post. I'm doing okay, despite everything. Losing my grandmother has been tough, but she lived a full life, and I take comfort in knowing she didn't pass away with any regrets. Thank you for all the kind words and condolences. As for my parents, they've been trying to bother me online, but I've told them that if they don't do what I said, they can forget about getting any money. I know my grandmother left everything to me in her will, and I'm sure my parents know that too, since the lawyer sent out an email now. All they can do is sit and wallow in their regret. It's been a week since I last spoke to them, and since none of the usual tactics have worked, they've resorted to sending me pictures of my brother. They keep sending me these photos, showing how bad he looks, insisting that this is the guy who needs my help. To that, I have only one thing to say. Where were they when I needed help? They'd abandoned me, and I was lucky that my grandmother had my back. Without her, I don't even know where I would have ended up. As much as I feel bad for my brother, I can't help them unless they acknowledge what they did. And it has to be public. I want the world to know what kind of people they are. If they can set aside their egos just for this one thing, I guess I consider helping. But honestly, for me, it's about breaking their pride. Their pride is what led them to do everything they did to me. And now, if they really want my help, they have to put it aside. I want to see what comes first for them, my brother's well-being or their pride. Update 2. 10 days have passed since I last spoke to my parents, and I eventually stopped responding to their messages. They showed up at my place a couple of hours ago, but this time they brought my brother with them. It was bad right from the start. I told them they couldn't do this, and that if anything, their behavior was only hurting their chances of getting anything out of me. I wasn't comfortable with them dragging my brother into this. Especially like this, it was dehumanizing for him to be used as a pawn in their game. I told them to leave, and at first they refused. They said if I wanted them to go, I'd have to promise that I would help them soon. I told them that I wasn't making any promises and that if they didn't leave, I'd call the police, given my brother's condition. That seemed to scare them off, and they left. But before they did, my dad had the nerve to say that both my grandmother and I were the most selfish people on the planet. And it's coming from them. They dumped me on my grandmother's doorstep because they couldn't handle me. Not because I was a bad kid, but because I wasn't the perfect son they expected. If my grandmother and I are selfish, then I don't think there are even words for what they are. Update 3. Hi all. Sorry for the long delay. I've been really busy with work, but things have changed a lot in the past 2 months. For one, my parents are blocked now. They can't contact me anymore because I moved to a new apartment in a new neighborhood, and I didn't give them the address. I've also made it clear to all my relatives that they're not to give out my address to anyone, especially my parents. Last time, someone decided they should know where I lived because my brother was suffering and gave them my address, which led to them contacting me. This time, I made sure that wouldn't happen again. After the last time we spoke, when my dad called me selfish, I decided to block them. Honestly, I don't want any more drama. They've shown me that their pride is always going to come first, above everything. Even the son they claim to love, I can accept that they never loved me, and that they didn't want me because of my ADHD, dyslexia, and all my other issues. But my brother? He was the perfect one, the one they supposedly loved. So how could they not make the smallest sacrifice for him? All they had to do was acknowledge that they had made mistakes, which would have been easy since most of our family already knew about the tension between us. But no, they couldn't do that. They don't want to admit they were wrong, because in their minds, they were perfect. Well, they can keep that belief to themselves. I'm keeping my inheritance for myself. Fair enough.